Well, actually, what is your main focus?
So I do, excuse me,
Sure.
outbound marketing for Windows Azure. So Windows Azure, you know that we have Windows Azure and we have SQL Azure. I focus mostly on the Windows Azure business. And I do messaging, positioning, and digital marketing for Windows Azure.
Messaging, positioning, and visual marketing.
That's right.
Okay, well, tell us a little bit about the three. What's the main message?
Great. So the biggest message, the simplest message really is that Windows Azure lets you focus on the application. That it's all about the application with Windows Azure. If you look at developers today, or even if you look at IT pros today, they want to focus on the application. They want to do what business wants to do. So, a business decision maker comes up and says, we have this problem to solve. I need an application. To get to that application, there is so much work involved that a business has to wait. You have to wait for business results to be available. What Windows Azure does is it lets you focus on what you do best. So that might mean development for some people, if you're an ISV. If you're a business, it may mean your core business, whether it's delivering packages, whether it's creating soft drinks, whether it's shipping stuff, and then doing it quickly. So if you notice a market demand and you want to react to it, Windows Azure gives you on-demand compute, storage, bandwidth that you can use to meet business needs. That's the value prop, really. It's all about freeing you up so you can do more of what you do best.
And what is the site, the area, in which a company that finally decides to deliver an application, you were talking about,
Yeah.
it's all about the
Application, that's right.
So I decide to deliver something to the cloud.
Yeah.
My big application
Yeah.
to the cloud. And I don't know, which are the main three advantages
Sure.
in terms of, because I know there is another side, like the learning curve.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Can you balance?
Yeah.
these things?
So if you're an ISV or you're an independent software vendor or you're a systems integrator and you have an application and you want to deploy it, the big benefit is you don't have to worry about things like patching the OS or managing the hardware or the heating or the cooling or buying servers and configuring them and patching them. All of those things now we take care of for you. So that's the first. If you just look at the hardware, you don't have to worry about the hardware because Microsoft owns and manages the hardware for you. Right. The second thing then is we also give you an application programming model that lets you write these scalable, available applications. A big benefit of the cloud is it lets you scale based on your demand. So you may start with a small application, right? And you may need a server or a VM for it. And then when the users show up, you may need 10, 50, 100, 1,000. The cloud and platform as a service specifically lets you go from that one server to 1,000 and back, depending on your demands. And you only pay for what you use.
That's right.
That's a big advantage.
An architecture change.
Absolutely. And so we give you, not only do we give you the hardware, excuse me, we also give you the programming model that lets you write applications that do this, that can go from one instance to 1,000 and then back again. And most importantly, because Microsoft has an ecosystem and we understand partners' needs, we give you the tools that you need to learn the platform, to get started on the platform. This could mean this is things like discounts in the offers, free access to the platform, and then also we're in the process of introducing a marketplace which will let you sell your own applications to a worldwide audience. So it's about giving you the technology, giving you the tools to make use of the technology, and then helping you with the business aspect of your undertaking also.
Okay. Well, let's abandon for a while the business aspect.
Sure.
And center into the application construction.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, I've got my team,
Yeah.
and they know, let's say, C# or VB.NET.
Sure.
And they're used to client-server
Yeah.
applications. And me, any other one, as a decision maker, thinks, well, how long
How much do
is
they have to
going to
relearn?
take them
Yes.
until they are productive?
Yes, that's a good question. So that's the good news is not long at all. It's a very short learning curve, especially if you were a .NET developer. If you've been using Visual Studio and the .NET framework and C#, you can use the exact same tools and start building on Windows Azure. Because we now give you an SDK and tool set that snaps into Visual Studio. So your interface, your development interface, doesn't change at all. That's the first thing. F5 still does what F5 does on premises in the cloud also. The next aspect is we've taken an application and broken it down into roles. Right? It's just a formalized division of an application. So even when you're writing an application today on premises, you think of the front end and you think of the back end. Right? We've just formalized it to give you a web role for the front end and a worker role for the back end, and now a VM role that gives you full control. So logically, it's not that different. The big step or the learning curve is writing stateless applications. So instead of stateless application, so instead of preserving data like application state or session state within the VM, you have to write it externally, which is not that difficult to learn.
Well, stateless applications are more or less ASP.NET.
You're exactly right.
Applications.
You're exactly right. You're exactly right. So if you're writing ASP.NET applications today on premises, you can just take them and run them in Windows Azure without any change. The amount of work to take a non-ASP.NET application, which is running on premises, could be very little or could be a lot, depending on the application. So I'll give you an example. Kelley Blue Book is a company in the US, and they do vehicle evaluations online. And their whole website was running on premises, on Windows Server. And they wanted to build a new data center for overflow traffic. Right? When peak times, that one data center wasn't enough. Then they said, wait, we don't really want to be in the hardware business. So can the cloud help us? And they looked at Windows Azure, and they could convert their website to run on Windows Azure in a week with 2 developers. So it's not a lot of time at all. And we're seeing this a lot. People look at the benefits of the cloud, and then for new applications, they get started right away. But we're seeing more and more existing applications migrate to the cloud also. And that's where you need some work, depending on the application. But you're right. If you know ASP.NET, you can start developing today, right now.
I know ASP.NET. I'm not a specialist about it, but I am more focused, or I was more focused on Silverlight.
Uh-huh.
And I've been asking to the other interviewees that have passed around here today, and I guess you know what I'm going to ask you about. It's about that, supposedly that fight or whatever between HTML5 and Silverlight, and those the misinterpretation that some journalists that I'm not going to mention here, but everybody knows who she is, did about Bob Muglia's declarations.
Right. You know, I don't think I'm the right person to comment on that.
No, what's your opinion?
I don't know if I particularly have an opinion.
You're in the cloud. Do you see Silverlight? Do you see HTML5? Do you see them both?
I can address that. So I think the approach we take is we're a general purpose platform. Windows Azure is a general purpose platform. What that means is, if you want to run Silverlight, we love it. Come run Silverlight on us. If you want to run HTML5, great, we love it. For us, in fact, we're not just a .NET platform either, right? We also support Java, PHP, Ruby, the other programming languages. Our approach is, we want to give you, developers, maximum flexibility in running your own applications in the cloud. And so from a Windows Azure perspective, I don't think we necessarily have an opinion of whether Silverlight or HTML5.
This comes in a way because Solid Quality Mentors has successfully deployed, a very big application for a very important company in the real estate area. And it's a joining of a bunch of technologies working all together, perfectly working all together. And SQL Server on the data side, with business intelligence and data mining on the business intelligence side, and Silverlight on the client side. And the way they've done it is such that, like the editorialist Fernando Guerrero said the other day in the magazine, the Solid Quality Journal, this data lets you see the past, the present, and the future, and that's what it makes the difference. Because Silverlight includes animation, so you can make prospections of how things are going to be moving from the time now, from its lifetime, right nowadays, or in 1 year, year and a half, 2 years, and so on. Do you think that's the natural movement, the way that
Yeah.
That business applications should behave.
I will. I'll address it in a slightly different manner. I think if the question that you asked me is basically, you've had a lot of applications running on premises, running on SQL Server, Windows servers, on premises. How is the movement of those applications to the cloud? Right, and I'll answer that question because again, I'm not the expert on the Silverlight, specifically the Silverlight versus HTML5. Yeah. So I think that's a really good question, and I think the migration, the first step will be on-premises applications using the cloud to complement what they're doing.
Right.
And I'll give a couple of examples. Storage. It makes a lot of sense that if you're doing an on-premises application and you run out of storage space, you would store that in the cloud. This could be blob or table storage for Windows Azure, or it could be SQL Azure with taking your SQL Server data and storing it in the cloud. In fact, at PDC we announced a new CTP for the data sync technology, which lets you sync between an on-premises SQL Server database and a SQL Azure database. And even SQL Azure database is spread out over multiple data centers.
That's another question that I have pending.
Yeah.
And I was going to ask you, when do you think that's going to be ready?
Yeah, so the CTP was announced at PDC and should be available
the final product
soon. I don't think we're talking about the final production date, but the CTP is going to be available this calendar year, is my understanding, for that particular technology. But going back to the earlier point, complement is the first way to start. You keep the application on premises, you add on storage or compute in the cloud first. Then the next thing you do is you look at your application portfolio. You have hundreds, thousands of applications. And you look at applications like ASP.NET applications that you could move today to the cloud. So you start small. You start with some applications, start with a particular workload, and you get comfortable with the idea of being in the cloud. And then you expand the universe.
Yeah.
I think that's a good approach. That's an approach we're seeing many companies take today to move to the cloud. Is first you evaluate your portfolio, you pick certain applications that you can move to the cloud. You get used to those, and then you add more applications over a period of time. And some applications will run on premises for 10 months of the year and run in the cloud for 2 months when you have high demand. Others, you can move back and forth on a daily, monthly, weekly basis. Whereas others will run on premises only or only in the cloud. So I think that's sort of the entire portfolio.
Okay, let's admit that you have convinced companies to move to Windows Azure
Great.
as a platform, platform as a service.
Yeah.
And even you have convinced, the learning curve
Sure.
is not going to be too painful and so on. Small businesses fall into that category too?
Absolutely. In fact, for small businesses, you can think of this as, democratization of technology. So if you look at data centers and who could build data centers, very few companies could afford data centers, still can afford data centers. And it's typically enterprises, big companies that can do it. With the cloud, it's sort of the equalizer, because even a small business can now get access to thousands of servers or tens of thousands of servers on a daily, weekly, monthly basis because of the cloud. And they don't have to spend any money up front to get it. Right? So that's a huge advantage. The second thing is software as a service is very important for small and medium businesses, because as opposed to deploying your own applications, you can just consume applications via the browser, via software as a service. And those applications are possible because of platform as a service solutions like ours that people can build on top of. So I think the cloud is especially important for small businesses. And from what we're seeing, small businesses are adopting the cloud faster than bigger companies in certain scenarios.
Well, that's another concern, because you say faster, it seems that if you make such a big change in the architecture, you do it when you deploy to the cloud.
Yeah.
And what happens to the application lifecycle management? I mean, if you change that, and it's important in architecture, I mean, what are the implications going around the 5 or 6 phases
Right.
that the ALM has?
Right. This is where I think you need an experience in the cloud that's consistent with what you've been doing on premises. So you've been using certain ALM products on premises, and you want the experience, the test dev management experience, to be as close to that in the cloud. And again, I want to talk about the Visual Studio integration and the TFS. We did a demo of a proof of concept at PDC of TFS running in Windows Azure and being given to you as a service. So that's when, if we're building off of your existing knowledge, and if you can use your existing knowledge about the application, about development, and about ALM in the cloud, that's a big plus. And that's certainly what we believe in, which is why we're building off of Visual Studio and the Visual Studio tools. So I think the objective is, our tagline is the future made familiar. We want you to start with what you know, and we want you to build on top of that, as opposed to saying, forget about everything that I know, let's start brand new. And I think the same is true for ALM also, is you want to take the existing concepts and apply them to the cloud.
Well, that's one question. The other question in relation with the cloud and Azure in general, is that the one who didn't move yet maybe read something about it. And it sounds familiar. Windows Azure platform, SQL Server,
SQL Azure,
database, APP Fabric, and security.
Right.
Maybe they know that the four of them work properly. But do they work properly in an independent way? Or
Absolutely.
do they have to work in a better together
That's a
way?
very good question. So you can use aspects of Windows Azure and SQL Azure independently. For example, Windows Azure gives you compute, storage, bandwidth, so CDN, content distribution network, stuff that's available through App Fabric, so the service plus access control. And then you also have SQL Azure. You can use any one of the Windows Azure modules independently. For example, you might decide that you have an application running on premises that needs blob storage. You have pictures or media files. You can use only the storage aspect of Windows Azure without using anything else, right? So you don't have to use a combination of all of those things. Now, if you want to, we have a really good story and good integrated story for Windows Azure plus SQL Azure and the App Fabric elements and the CDN elements and the virtual network elements. But they're all loosely coupled, which means just because you use one element doesn't mean you have to use everything else. It completely depends on what you want to do. And if you look at the billing meters, for example, for Windows Azure, compute is built separately, storage is built separately, bandwidth is built separately. So if you use one, you're not billed for something else.
And what is the glue that makes the whole things work together?
The glue is the programming model. So when you think about applications, some people will start with net new applications. And when they do, the programming model is the real glue, which lets you use these different components together in an efficient way and helps you get your products to market faster. When you're thinking about complementing existing applications, you don't really need the programming model because you have an application and you have a very specific need in terms of storage or in terms of getting the CDN nodes going. In those cases, you don't really need the programming model, but you can still use the platform. So I think it's a division between new and existing applications. That's how I would think about it.
Well, let me just finish with some advice, I hope, from your side.
Please.
And it's in relation with SQL Azure. I know it's not specifically your specialty, but even so. Because some say that, okay, I know very well how to manage, or who is able to manage very well SQL Server, standard SQL Server, having run as much as he has in the last year. But what happens with SQL? Is it able to perform the same things? Because I've heard that some things are more difficult to implement. Am I going to get into trouble if I move to SQL Azure?
You are not going to get into trouble. So if you look at both Windows Azure and SQL Azure, and if you look at the principles that we have in place, the principle is automated service management, which means we take care of a lot of the maintenance tasks that you were otherwise having to worry about. On the Windows side, it's patching and redundancy and all of those. On the SQL Azure side, it's HA, right? So for high availability, you had to do a whole bunch of things if you were running SQL Server on premises, and the management associated with that. SQL Azure now automates many of those things, so you don't have to worry about it. Again, if you're using SQL Server today, the calls remain the same. We support the same procedures. We support T-SQL, but you don't have to worry about some of the management tasks. So We've seen cases where, we talked about the complementing scenario earlier, where on-premises SQL Server is being complemented by SQL Azure in the cloud. And I think that, again, is a really good way to get started and to get comfortable. I think a lot of it has to do with peace of mind. There's a technical aspect. People want to know, how do you do it? Is it possible? The second is, will you be okay with doing it? Will you feel comfortable trusting your data and your compute to someone else? And the best way to really know is to try it out with a small application. And again, I would suggest the same thing for SQL Azure as well.
So your advice, make a small
application.
A part of your application, try it,
That's
and
it.
then
Expand. Exactly right. Start with a small application. Either extend your existing application to the cloud, which is a good way to start, or if you have a net new application, start with a small application, run it in the cloud, get comfortable, and then you can expand. We're seeing that a lot of customers start small and grow very quickly as they become comfortable.
Well, just to finish, I have to ask you this, because I read that you were senior product manager for Microsoft Visio.
Right.
Microsoft Visio is not exactly in the packet of Office.
Right.
And we're wondering what's going to happen about Visio, and especially about Office 365.
Right.
And it is going to cover as well.
So
Visio will be an important tool in the ILM. So.
Yes. I love Visio, and it's a great product, and I enjoyed working on it. Unfortunately, the information that I have is going to be 3 years old at this point, because I've been on Windows Azure now for 3 years. So I don't know if I can help you with that particular question.
Okay.
So I can direct you. I think we can work together and direct you to the right resource. But unfortunately, the information that I have is probably older than the information you have at this point.
All right.
So I have to disappoint you there.
Don't worry. We'll just.
It's a good question.
For the relationship that you have with.
Yes. It's a great product, and I think we were talking about this before the interview. Once you start using the product, you find all these great uses for it in other places, and for visual representation of ideas and brainstorming.
Right.
It's really good.
Okay, Aashish, very nice to have you here.
Thank you.
We expect to meet somewhere else.
Likewise.
We'll let you know when this interview is published.
Fantastic.